The first step into the rainforest changed everything. Threxel had seen images. He had watched videos. He had studied maps and diagrams and reports. None of it had prepared him for the reality of actually being there. The green was everywhere. It surrounded them completely, above and below and on every side. Plants grew on top of other plants. Vines hung from branches like reaching fingers. Moss covered every surface that's still long enough. The air itself seemed green, filtered through countless layers of leaves. And the sounds. The sounds were overwhelming. Birds called from the canopy. Dozens of different songs mixing together into a chaotic chorus. Insects buzzed and clicked and hummed in an endless drone. Water dripped from leaves. Something moved in the undergrowth, rustling the plants. Something else called out in the distance. A strange howling that made Threxel's skin prickle with fear. His environmental suit's sensors were going wild. They detected movement everywhere, heat signatures in every direction, potential threats appearing and disappearing faster than he could track. The suit's alert system began beeping repeatedly, warning him of dangers on all sides. Sergeant Chun reached over and pressed a button on his suit, silencing the alarms. "Turn off the automatic alerts," she told the group calmly. "They will drive you crazy and tell you nothing useful. The jungle is full of life. That is normal. I will tell you when something is actually dangerous." Easy for her to say, Threxel thought. She had grown up on this death world. To her, this chaos was normal. But he turned off the alerts. So did the others. Sergeant Chen began walking, and the cadets followed. She moved through the jungle with a grace that seemed almost magical. Her feet found stable ground automatically. Her body twisted through gaps in the vegetation without disturbing a single leaf. She seemed to know exactly where to step, exactly how to move, exactly when to duck under a branch or step over a root. The cadets were not so graceful. Threxel tripped 3 times in the first hour. Torgan, the massive Gorvathy, kept getting his armored shoulders stuck between trees. The Shivari cadets were struggling with the humidity despite their protective coatings. Little Pip clung to his harness and made small frightened sounds with every strange noise. But Sergeant Chun was patient. "Trail marker," she called out, stopping the point at a tree. "See the mark I carved here? Notice how the sap has darkened. That means this trail was cut at least a week ago and has been used regularly. Fresh cuts look lighter. This tells you the path is established and monitored." She made them gather around and look at the mark until everyone could recognize it. When you see these markers, you know you are on a safe path. If you ever get separated from the group, look for these marks. They will lead you to the nearest secure zone. They continued walking. Every few minutes, Sergeant Chun would stop to point out something important. A certain plant that caused painful rashes if touched. A type of ant that traveled in massive swarms and could strip flesh from bones. A tree with thorns that carried infection. A beautiful flower that released poisonous spores. "Do not touch," she said about the flower. "Do not even get close. The spores can travel several meters. Just admire from a distance." Threxel noticed that she always gave them distance measurements. Never vague warnings like "stay away." Always specific. Remain at least 3 meters from this plant, or give this animal at least 10 meters of space. She was precise in everything she did. They reached the first secure zone around. Midday. It was a cleared area on slightly elevated ground, surrounded by a fence-like barrier made of woven branches. Inside, there were shelters for each species, emergency supply caches, and a small communication station. The ground was covered with material that would not become muddy during rain. "Welcome to Secure Zone 1, Sergeant Chun said. "You will sleep here tonight." Notice the elevation. During heavy rains, water flows downhill. This zone is positioned above the flood line. The barriers are treated with substances that discourage most insects and small animals. The shelters have emergency beacons. If anything goes wrong, activate the beacon and help will come. She showed them each shelter, explaining how to use the species-specific equipment inside. The Volani shelter had temperature controls and allergy medication. The Kathrani shelter had additional parasite barriers. The Gorvathi shelter had reinforced supports to handle their weight. After they rested and ate, Sergeant Chun led them back into the jungle for afternoon training. "Now I show you the beautiful things," she said, and her voice was different, warmer, almost loving. She took them to a place where the trees opened up slightly, allowing shafts of sunlight to penetrate the canopy. A waterfall cascaded down moss-covered rocks into a clear pool. The water sparkled like liquid light. "Safe to look at," she said. "Not safe to swim in. There are parasites in the water." But is it not beautiful? It was. Threxel had never seen anything like it. A butterfly drifted past them, its wings bright blue like pieces of the sky. The Shivari cadet named Christine made a sound of wonder, her crystalline body chiming softly with appreciation. "Morpha butterfly," Sergeant Chun said. "Not dangerous, just beautiful. The jungle is full of such wonders if you know where to look." She showed them more. Flowers that glowed in the dim light. Birds with feathers of impossible colors. Frogs the size of fingertips, painted in patterns like tiny jewels. A sloth hanging in the trees, moving so slowly it seemed frozen in time. "The jungle is not evil," Sergeant Chun said softly. "It is not trying to kill you. It is simply alive. More alive than almost anywhere else in the galaxy. Every creature here is just trying to survive, just like you. When you understand that, the jungle becomes less frightening. It becomes something to respect instead of something to fear." Crixera moved closer to Threxel. "She loves this place," she whispered. "I can hear it in her voice. She truly loves it." Threxel nodded. He could hear it too. As the day ended, and they returned to Secure Zone 1. Threxel realized something had changed. He was still afraid. The jungle was still dangerous. But it was also beautiful. It was also amazing. And he was beginning to see it the way Sergeant Chun saw it. Not as an enemy to be fought, but as a world to be understood. That night, as he lay in the Volani shelter listening to the endless sounds of the jungle, Threxel thought about the human who was guiding them through this place. She had prepared everything. The trails, the markers, the secure zones, the species-specific equipment. She had spent 6 months learning about each of them, understanding their needs, planning for their safety. She moved through this deadly environment like she belonged here, and she was trying to teach them to do the same. Threxel did not understand humans. He had heard stories about them, about their aggression, their stubbornness, their ability to survive in impossible conditions. But Sergeant Chun did not seem aggressive. She seemed careful, patient, protective. Maybe, he thought, the stories about humans did not tell the whole truth. Maybe there was more to them than just being dangerous. He fell asleep still thinking about it. And for the first time since receiving the training assignment, his dreams were not nightmares. The message appeared on every cadet's datapad at exactly the same moment. Threxel was eating his morning meal when his screen lit up with the training assignment. He read the words once. Then he read them again. His 4 hearts began to beat faster, and the food in his mouth suddenly tasted like dust. Earth. Survival training. Amazon rainforest. 21 days. Around him in the dining hall, he heard the reactions of his fellow cadets. A Shivari cadet dropped her tray, the crystalline structures of her body crackling with anxious energy. The sound was sharp and unpleasant, like glass breaking slowly. 2 Kathrani cadets began chittering to each other in their native language, their insectoid bodies clicking and trembling. Even the massive Gorvathi cadet at the next table, A being covered in natural armor plates had gone very still. Threxel looked across the table at his friend Crixara. She was also Vellani, like him. Her pale blue skin had gone almost white with fear. Her 4 eyes were wide. "Earth," she whispered. "They are sending us to Earth." Every species in the Galactic Union knew about Earth. It was a Class 7 death world. This was the second highest danger rating possible. The planet had extreme weather, aggressive wildlife, and environments that seemed designed to kill anything that entered them. Mountains that froze visitors solid. Deserts that cooked them alive. Oceans filled with predators that had more teeth than seemed reasonable. But the rainforests were the worst. Threxel had studied the reports during his first year at the academy. The Amazon rainforest covered millions of square kilometers. It contained more species of life than entire planets in other systems. The humidity was so high that it damaged Shivari crystal structures. The parasites could burrow into Kathrani exoskeletons and lay eggs inside them. There were fungi that could infect any organic matter. Snakes with venom that stopped hearts. Spiders the size of dinner plates. Fish that could strip flesh from bones in minutes. Frogs so poisonous that touching them meant death. And the insects. Billions upon billions of insects, carrying diseases that alien immune systems had no defense against. The survival statistics for non-Terran cadets in Earth's rainforests were not good. Threxel had seen the numbers. He wished he had not. "Maybe it is a mistake," Crixara said hopefully. "Maybe they meant a different planet. There must be other planets with rainforests." Threxel checked the message again. It was not a mistake. The coordinates were clear. They would be transported to Earth in 3 weeks. They would spend 21 days in the Amazon rainforest. They would learn survival skills in one of the most dangerous environments known to the Galactic Union. The Gorvathi cadet stood up suddenly. His name was Torgan, and he was nearly 3 meters tall. His armored body could stop most projectile weapons. He had once lifted a ground vehicle to rescue trapped civilians during a training exercise. He was one of the strongest beings Threxel had ever met. Right now, Torgan looked scared. "I am going to speak with the Commandant," Torgan announced. "This assignment must be changed. It is too dangerous." He walked out of the dining hall. Threxel watched him go and knew that Torgan would not succeed. The Academy did not change assignments because cadets were frightened. Fear was something to be overcome, not avoided. That was what the instructors always said. The next 3 weeks passed too quickly. Threxel tried to prepare himself mentally for what was coming. He read everything he could find about Earth's rainforests. This was a mistake. The more he learned, the more terrified he became. He started having nightmares about vines that strangled, and insects that burrowed in water that rose without warning. When the day finally came, the cadets gathered in the transport bay. There were 15 of them in Training Group Theta 7, 5 Vellani, including Threxel and Crixara, 4 Kathrani, 3 Shivari, 2 Gorvathi, including Torgan, and 1 Minari, a small furry being named Pip, who looked like he might faint at any moment. They stood in silence, waiting for their instructor. The door opened, and a human walked in. She was small. That was Threxel's first thought. Compared to the Gorvathi, compared to even the Vellani, this human was tiny. She was shorter than Crixara by at least 30 centimeters. Her hair was black and pulled back from her face. Her skin was brown and weathered, marked with small scars. Her eyes were dark and calm. Too calm, Threxel thought. No one should be that calm when discussing the Amazon rainforest. "I am Sergeant Maya Chun," the human said. Her voice was not loud, but somehow it filled the room. "I will be your instructor for this survival training. I will also be your guide in the rainforest." No one responded. The cadets were too nervous to speak. Sergeant Chun, looked at each of them in turn. Her gaze was steady and measured. When she looked at Threxel, he felt like she was seeing straight through him, counting his fears and cataloging his weaknesses. "I know what you have heard about Earth's rainforests," she continued. "I know you are afraid. That fear is reasonable. The Amazon is dangerous. It has killed many beings, including many humans. It will not hesitate to kill you if you give it the chance." This was not comforting. Threxel heard Pip make a small whimpering sound. Then Sergeant Chun smiled. It was a strange smile, warm but also fierce, like sunlight reflecting off a blade. "But I am not going to let that happen," she said. "I have spent the last 6 months preparing for your arrival. I have studied your physiologies, your weaknesses, your needs. I have walked every meter of the training area. I have marked trails, established secure zones, and prepared for every emergency I could imagine. The rainforest is my home, and for the next 21 days you will be my guest there." She stepped closer to the group. Despite her small size, she seemed to grow larger somehow. Her presence filled the space around her. "I am not asking you to conquer the jungle. I am not asking you to fight it. I am asking you to trust me. Follow my instructions exactly. Stay on the paths I have made. Use the safe zones I have created. And I promise you, every single one of you will walk out of that rainforest alive and stronger than when you entered." She looked around at them again, and her smile softened. "The jungle is not your enemy. It is just a place full of life, following its own rules. I am going to teach you those rules. And once you understand them, you will see that survival is not about being the strongest or the fastest. It is about being prepared, being careful, and being smart." Sergeant Chung clasped their hands behind her back. "We leave in 1 hour. Gather your equipment and meet at the transport. Your training begins now." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving 15 terrified alien cadets staring after her. Threxel looked at Krixara. "Do you believe her?" he asked quietly. "Do you think she can really keep us all alive?" Krixara was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "She spent 6 months preparing for us." 6 months. For a 3-week training exercise. Threxel thought about that. He thought about the calm confidence in the human's eyes. He thought about the scars on her skin, evidence of dangers she had already survived. "Maybe," he said slowly, "maybe humans are not just dangerous. Maybe they are also something else." He did not know what that something else was. Not yet, but he was beginning to suspect that he was about to find out. The transport ship landed at a human military base on the edge of the rainforest. Threxel stepped out and immediately felt the air hit him like a warm, wet blanket. It was thick. It was heavy. It pressed against his skin and made his lungs work harder. "This is the humidity," Sergeant Chen explained, watching the cadets react to the strange atmosphere. "Your bodies will adjust over the next few days. For now, drink plenty of water and rest when you need to." The base was simple but well organized. There were sleeping quarters for each species, designed to meet their specific needs. The Shivari quarters had special humidity controls to protect their crystalline bodies. The Kathrani quarters had air filters to keep parasites away from their breathing holes. The Villani quarters were cooler than the others, matching the temperature of their home world. Threxel was impressed. Someone had put a lot of thought into these arrangements. That someone, he realized, was Sergeant Chun. The first 3 weeks were spent in preparation. They did not enter the rainforest immediately. Instead, Sergeant Chun began teaching them everything they needed to know to survive. The lessons started early each morning and continued until late at night. First, she taught them about the environment itself. She showed them holographic maps of the training area, pointing out rivers, hills, clearings, and dangerous zones. She had walked every part of this land herself, she explained. She knew where the ground was stable and where it might collapse. She knew where water collected during rain and where floods were likely to occur. She knew which areas the predators preferred and which areas were relatively safe. "The jungle follows patterns," she said during one lesson. "Animals hunt at certain times. Plants grow in certain places. Water flows in certain directions. Once you understand the patterns, the jungle becomes predictable. Not safe, but predictable. And predictable things can be prepared for." She showed them the trail system she had created. Over the past 6 months, she had cut paths through the dense vegetation, marking them with specific symbols carved into trees. Each symbol meant something different. An upward arrow meant higher ground ahead, useful during floods. A circle meant a secure zone nearby. A cross meant danger, do not proceed. "You will memorize these symbols," she said. "You will recognize them instantly, without thinking. In an emergency, you will not have time to remember what they mean. Your body must know automatically." She drilled them on the symbols until they could identify them in their sleep. Next, she addressed their individual physiological needs. This was where Threxel truly began to understand how much work this human had done. For the HFY cadets, she had developed a special coating that could be applied to their crystal structures. This coating would protect them from the humidity that could otherwise cause cracks and damage. She had also created ultrasonic devices that would keep the most dangerous insects away from their sensitive forms. "I worked with HFY medical experts for 2 months to develop this," she explained as she demonstrated the coating. "It has been tested extensively. It works." For the Kathrani, she had prepared barrier applications that would seal their exoskeleton joints and spiracles, the breathing holes the parasites love to target. She had also mapped every species of insect in the training area and identified which ones pose threats to Kathrani biology. "These are the 14 species you must avoid at all costs," she said, showing them images. "I have marked their nesting areas on your maps. We will not go near them." For the Villani, including Threxel and Krixara, she had conducted a complete biochemical analysis. She had identified 37 plants and 12 animals that could trigger dangerous allergic reactions in Villani biology. She had marked every location where these species lived. She had prepared emergency medications specifically designed for Villani physiology. "If you touch one of these plants or are bitten by one of these animals, tell me immediately," she instructed. "The medication works quickly, but only if administered within the first few minutes." For the Gorvathi, she had mapped rest areas where their heavy bodies could be supported without sinking into soft ground. She had identified food sources that would meet their high nutritional needs. She had even prepared cooling stations because Gorvathi were prone to overheating in humid environments. For little Pip, the Minari, she had created a full-body suit that would protect his small, vulnerable form from almost everything. She had also designed a harness system that would allow one of the larger cadets to carry him quickly if evacuation became necessary. Threxel watched all of this with growing amazement. "How did you learn all of this?" he asked one evening after a particularly long day of training. Sergeant Chen looked at him with her calm, dark eyes. "I researched. I studied. I consulted with medical experts from each of your species. I made mistakes and corrected them. I tested every solution multiple times to make sure it worked." "But why?" Threxel pressed. "We are not humans. We are not even from your world. Why would you spend so much effort on us?" The human was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you were assigned to me. You are my cadets. That makes you my responsibility. And I take my responsibilities very seriously." It was such a simple answer, And yet Threxel felt that there was something deeper behind it, something he did not fully understand. The physical training was intense. Sergeant Chun made them practice walking through difficult terrain, climbing over obstacles, and crossing water safely. She made them memorize the locations of every secure zone in the training area. She made them rehearse emergency procedures until they could perform them without thinking. When danger comes, you will not have time to think, she said repeatedly. Your body must know what to do. Practice is how we teach the body. She also taught them to recognize the sounds and smells of the rainforest. The call of a certain bird meant predators were near. The smell of a certain flower meant poisonous plants were close. The sound of rushing water might mean a flood was coming. The jungle talks, she said. You just have to learn its language. On the last day, before they would enter the rainforest, Sergeant Chen gathered all 15 cadets together. Tomorrow we begin, she said. You have learned a lot in these 3 weeks. You have worked hard. But I want you to remember one thing above all else. She looked at each of them in turn, her eyes serious. Stay together. Follow my instructions. Trust the system we have built. The secure zones are there for you. The trails are there for you. The emergency supplies are there for you. I have prepared for every danger I could imagine. But preparation only works if you use it. She paused, and her expression softened slightly. You are going to be scared. That is normal. Fear keeps you alert. But do not let fear make you panic. Do not run blindly. Do not abandon the group. Whatever happens, we face it together. She raised her hand in a human gesture that Threxel had learned meant encouragement. Get some sleep tonight. Tomorrow, we enter the jungle. And I promise you, we will all walk out again. Threxel went to bed that night feeling something strange. It took him a long time to identify the emotion. It was hope. Despite everything he knew about the dangers ahead, he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this small human could actually keep her promise. 9 days into the training, the jungle tried to kill them. The morning had started normally. They had eaten breakfast at Secure Zone 4, packed their equipment, and begun the day's trek. Sergeant Chen led them along a trail that followed a river, explaining how to identify safe water sources and avoid areas where dangerous animals gathered to drink. The sky was darker than usual. Thick clouds blocked the sunlight, making the jungle even dimmer than normal. Threxel noticed that Sergeant Chun kept looking up at the sky, her expression troubled. We need to move faster, she said suddenly. Rain is coming. Possibly heavy rain. The cadets increased their pace. They had practiced this during their preparation weeks. They knew that rain in the jungle could be dangerous. Water rose quickly. Trails became slippery. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. But they were not prepared for what actually happened. The sound came first. A deep rumbling, like thunder but continuous, coming from upstream. Sergeant Chun's head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time since Threxel had met her, he saw fear flash across her face. Flash flood, she shouted. Secure Zone 7, now move. She pointed toward a rocky hill about 200 meters away. There were handholds carved into the rock face, a path leading up to higher ground. This was an emergency escape route she had shown them during their second day. Threxel had memorized the location without really believing they would ever need it. Now, he was running toward it as fast as he could. The cadets responded to their training. Without thinking, they moved as a group toward the escape route. The Kathrani cadets, with their multiple legs, were fastest. They reached the rock face first and began climbing. The Gorvathi followed, their massive bodies surprisingly agile when motivated by fear. The Shivari moved in a tight cluster, helping each other navigate the uneven ground. Threxel ran beside Krixara, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the rumbling growing louder. He could feel the ground beginning to shake. They reached the rock face. Hands reached down to help pull him up. Drexel grabbed a handhold and started climbing. The carved grips were exactly where Sergeant Chun had said they would be, exactly the right size for multiple species to use. She had planned this. She had prepared for exactly this situation. He was halfway up when he heard Sergeant Chun's voice cutting through the chaos. Krixara. Drexel looked down and felt his foreheart stop. Krixara had not moved. She was standing at the bottom of the rock face, frozen in place. Her four eyes were wide and empty. Her body was completely still. She was paralyzed by terror. The wall of water appeared around the river bend, brown and churning and filled with debris. It was moving faster than anything Drexel had ever seen. It would reach them in seconds. Sergeant Chun was already moving. The small human sprinted back toward the flood zone, back toward certain death, back toward Krixara, nitrogen monoxide. Drexel screamed. Sergeant Chun did not hesitate. She reached Krixara, grabbed her around the waist, and lifted. The Vellani cadet was heavier than the human. Much heavier. It should have been impossible for such a small being to carry such a large one. Sergeant Chun carried her anyway. She ran toward the rock face with Krixara in her arms. The water was coming. Drexel could see it getting closer, eating the ground between them and the flood. He could see Sergeant Chun's legs straining, her face twisted with effort, her body pushing beyond its limits. They reached the rock. Sergeant Chun shoved Krixara toward the handholds. Climb, she screamed. Krixara's paralysis broke. She began climbing, her movements clumsy but desperate. Sergeant Chun climbed behind her, pushing her upward, keeping herself between Krixara and the approaching water. The flood hit. The sound was enormous. Water and debris crashed against the rock face like a living monster. Drexel saw Sergeant Chun's body jerk as the current grabbed at her legs. He saw her fingers tighten on the handholds she had carved months ago. He saw her brace herself, shielding Krixara's body with her own. The water pulled at them. It wanted to take them. It was strong enough to move boulders, strong enough to uproot trees. Sergeant Chun held on. Drexel did not know how. The human's grip should have failed. Her small body should have been torn away by the current. But she held on, her hands locked into the handholds like they were part of the stone itself. The water level rose. It reached Sergeant Chun's waist, then her chest. Still she held on. Still she shielded Krixara. Still she refused to let the jungle take what was hers. Then, slowly, the water began to drop. The flood passed. The current weakened. The water retreated. Sergeant Chun pushed Krixara up the last few meters, then pulled herself after. When they reached the top, the human collapsed onto the ground. She was bleeding. Her arms were covered in cuts from debris carried by the flood. Her left arm was bent at an angle that looked wrong. Her breathing was ragged and painful, but she was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, she gasped, pointing at each cadet in turn. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Everyone was there. Everyone was alive. Secure Zone 7, Sergeant Chun said, and despite everything, there was satisfaction in her voice. Held. The Kathrani cadet with medical training rushed to her side. Your arm is broken, he said. Possibly 2 breaks. You need to return to base for treatment. Sergeant Chun shook her head. Splinted. I can continue. Sergeant, you should not. Splinted. Her voice was calm but absolutely firm. I am not leaving my cadets. The medical cadet hesitated, then began treating her injuries. The other cadets gathered around, watching in silence. Krixara was crying, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry," she said. "I am so sorry." I froze. I could not move. "You almost died because of me." Sergeant Chen reached out with her good arm and touched Krixara's hand. It was a gentle touch, almost tender. "Fear is normal," she said softly. "What matters is that you moved when it counted. You climbed when I told you to climb. You did what you needed to do. Do not apologize for being afraid. Everyone is afraid sometimes. Even me." Krixara stared at her. "You were afraid?" "Terrified," Sergeant Chen admitted. "When I saw that water coming, I was more scared than I have been in years. But fear does not stop us from doing what we must do. It just makes it harder. And we do it anyway." She looked around at all of them. Her cadets, 15 alien beings from worlds across the galaxy, gathered around her on a rocky hill while a flood raged below. "This is what survival means," she said. "Not being unafraid. Being afraid and continuing anyway. Protecting each other. Refusing to leave anyone behind. That is what I am trying to teach you. Not just how to avoid danger, but how to face it together." Torgan, the massive Gorvathy, knelt beside her. His great armored body seemed somehow smaller than the injured human lying on the ground. "You went back," he said, "into the flood, for someone you barely know. Someone who is not even your species." Sergeant Chen smiled, though the expression was tight with pain. "She is my cadet," she said simply. "That is all that matters." They spent the night at Secure Zone 7. The shelters were dry, positioned above the flood line, just as Sergeant Chen had planned. The emergency supplies included species-specific medical equipment. Everything she had prepared, everything she had planned for, was exactly where it needed to be. Threxel sat outside the shelter, watching the stars appear through gaps in the canopy. Beside him, Krixara was silent. "She almost died for me," Krixara finally said. "A human I had known for only a few weeks. She almost died for me." Threxel nodded. He did not know what to say. "Why?" Krixara asked. "Why would anyone do that?" Threxel thought about the question for a long time. He thought about everything he had learned about humans, everything he had seen Sergeant Chen do, everything she had said. "I think," he said slowly, "that is just what humans do. It is part of who they are. They protect. They prepare. They refuse to let the danger take what is theirs." He paused. "I do not think I fully understand it, but I am beginning to think it might be the most human thing about them." Krixara was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I want to understand it. I want to learn to be like that." Threxel looked at her, surprised. But when he thought about it, he realized he felt the same way. Maybe that was what Sergeant Chen was really teaching them. Not just survival. Something more. On the 21st day, they walked out of the jungle. All 15 of them. Every single cadet who had entered the rainforest 3 weeks earlier emerged alive and unharmed. The only serious injury had been to Sergeant Chen herself, and she had refused evacuation, continuing to guide them with her arm in a makeshift sling and her body covered in healing cuts and bruises. Threxel stood at the jungles edge and looked back at the wall of green that had terrified him so completely just weeks ago. It still looked wild. It still looked dangerous. But it no longer looked like an enemy waiting to kill him. It looked like a place he had survived. A place he had learned to read, at least a little. A place that had tested him and found him capable. The transport vehicles were waiting for them. So was the Academy Commandant, a Gorvathy admiral named Korthax. He was even larger than Torgan, his armored body decorated with medals and honors from a long military career. He had made the journey from the Academy specifically to greet them. This was unusual. Commandants did not normally meet training groups at extraction points. Admiral Korthax, approached Sergeant Chun. The tiny human looked even smaller next to the massive Gorvathy, barely reaching his chest even when standing at full attention. Her injured arm was still in its sling. Her uniform was dirty and torn in several places. She looked exhausted, but she also looked proud. "Sergeant Chen," the Admiral rumbled, his deep voice carrying easily across the clearing. "Your performance reports have been received and reviewed. A perfect survival record under adverse conditions. Flash flood on day 9. No casualties." Sergeant Chun nodded. "Yes, sir. The Academy has not seen a perfect record for a mixed-species training group in this environment for 17 years. The Admiral paused. "I wish to offer my personal commendation." "Thank you, sir. But I did not do this alone." The cadets performed admirably. They followed their training. They trusted the system. They should receive the commendation, not me. The Admiral made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Humble as always, Sergeant. The cadets performed well because you prepared them well. That is the nature of good instruction." He turned to look at the cadets, his ancient eyes moving from face to face. Drexel stood straighter when that gaze passed over him. "You have survived one of the most dangerous environments in the known galaxy," Admiral Korthak said. "You have faced fear and overcome it. You have worked as a team, regardless of species differences. These are the skills that will serve you throughout your military careers. Remember what you have learned here. Remember the one who taught you." He turned back to Sergeant Chun. "You are dismissed, Sergeant. Report to medical for proper treatment of your injuries." "That is an order." Sergeant Chen smiled slightly. "Yes, sir." The Admiral returned to his vehicle and departed. The cadets began loading their equipment onto the transport. But before they could leave, Threxel found himself walking towards Sergeant Chun. The others followed. Soon all 15 cadets were gathered around their instructor, standing in a rough circle on the grass at the jungle's edge. Sergeant Chun looked at them with a curious expression. "Is something wrong?" Threxel spoke first. He had been thinking about what to say for days, ever since the flood, but the words still felt inadequate. "We wanted to thank you," he said, "and to ask you something." "Ask." Threxel gathered his thoughts. "You spent 6 months preparing for us. You learned about our physiologies, our weaknesses, our needs. You cut trails and built shelters and planned for emergencies. You risked your life to save Krexara." He paused. "We are not humans. We are not from your world. We are not even from your species. Why would you do all of this for us?" The other cadets nodded. This was the question they had all been wondering. The question that had grown larger and more important with each passing day. Sergeant Chun was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the jungle behind them, at the cadets before her, at the sky above. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "On Earth," she said, "we have a saying. It comes from our military, but it has become something more. The saying is, no one gets left behind." She looked at each of them in turn, meeting their eyes one by one. "When I was young, I asked my father what this meant. He told me that humans learned something important during our long history. We learned that survival is not a single-person achievement. We learned that the person next to you, even if you just met them, even if they are different from you in every way, is worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth risking everything for." She touched her injured arm absently. "The galaxy knows that Earth is a death world. They know that humans are dangerous, aggressive, stubborn. And perhaps that is true. But there is a reason we became that way. We became strong because we had to protect each other. We became dangerous because gentle beings do not survive on a world that wants to kill them. We became stubborn because giving up meant dying." Her voice grew warmer. "But strength without purpose is just destruction. Danger without direction is just chaos. What makes us human is not that we are powerful. It is that we use that power to protect, to prepare, to guide, to make sure that the people in our care survive and grow stronger. She smiled at them, the same calm, fierce smile she had given them on their first day. You were assigned to me. That made you my responsibility. My cadets, my people. It does not matter that you are not human. It does not matter that I had never met you before. What matters is that you were mine to protect. And humans do not abandon what is ours. Not ever. Not for any reason. Krixara stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and touched Sergeant Chun's uninjured hand. In Villani culture, this was a profound gesture of trust and connection. It meant I place myself in your care. It meant you are worthy of my faith. You are strange, Sergeant, Krixara said quietly. Your whole species is strange. Sergeant Chun laughed. It was a genuine laugh, full of warmth and affection. Yes, we get that a lot. One by one, the other cadets stepped forward. Torgan placed his massive armored hand on Sergeant Chun's shoulder, gentle despite his enormous strength. The Shivari cadets chimed softly, a harmonic tone that meant gratitude in their culture. The Kathrani touched their antennae together, then reached out to include the human in their circle. Little Pip climbed up onto Torgan's shoulder and waved his small paws. They stood there together, 15 aliens and 1 human, at the edge of a jungle that had tried to kill them and failed. Threxel felt something shift inside him. He understood now. He finally understood. Humans were not just dangerous. They were not just survivors. They were protectors. They were guides. They took responsibility for others and carried that responsibility with absolute commitment. They prepared and planned and sacrificed, not because they expected reward, but because that was simply who they were. The galaxy feared humans because they were powerful. But maybe, Threxel thought, the galaxy should also respect them. Maybe even love them. Because humans did not use their power only for themselves. They used it for anyone they chose to call their own. And once a human decided you were theirs, they would walk through fire and flood and death itself to keep you safe. In the years that followed, the cadets of Training Group Theta 7 would go on to serve with distinction throughout the Galactic Union. They would face many dangers, many challenges, many moments when giving up seemed like the only option. And in those moments, they would remember. They would remember a small human woman who had spent 6 months preparing to keep them alive. They would remember her calm voice teaching them to read the jungle's language. They would remember her running into a flood to save someone she barely knew. They would remember her words, "No one gets left behind." They would remember, and they would find the strength to continue, because that was what Sergeant Chun had really taught them. Not just survival, not just skills. She had taught them what it meant to protect something, to care for something, to refuse to give up on something no matter the cost. She had taught them how to be a little bit human. And that, they discovered, was the greatest lesson of all.